The Zephyrian ship Mindseeker dropped out of hyperspace with barely a whisper. Its hull shimmered like oil on water, bending light around itself until it became nearly invisible against the starfield. Captain HFY stood on the bridge, his 4 eyes scanning the tactical display with practiced ease. After 3 decades of intelligence gathering, this mission felt routine. "Target acquired," announced his sensor operator, tentacles dancing over the control surface. "Human vessel military configuration. Designation matches their heavy cruiser class." HFY nodded, his breathing slits fluttering with satisfaction. The Zephyrian collective had been monitoring this sector for months, watching the rapid expansion of these new aliens called humans. They spread like a virus across star systems, claiming worlds and building colonies with alarming speed. The collective needed to understand what drove them. The human ship hung motionless in space, its gray hull scarred with the marks of combat. Energy readings showed it was powered down to minimal systems, likely conducting routine maintenance. Perfect for their purposes. "Begin phase alignment," HFY ordered. "Prepare the neural probes." The Mindseeker had perfected this technique over centuries. Using quantum phase technology, they could slip their consciousness-reading tendrils through any ship's hull without detection. They had cataloged hundreds of species this way, mapping their fears, desires, and tactical capabilities. Most alien minds were simple things, focused on food, reproduction, and basic survival. Humans should be no different. The probe specialist, a thin creature named Kethvar, activated the scanning array. Invisible tendrils of psychic energy reached across space, penetrating the human ship's hull like it was made of mist. The neural interface hummed to life, ready to record everything. "Contact established," Kethvar reported, reading approximately 250 consciousness signatures aboard the target vessel. HFY settled into his command chair, watching the data stream begin. The first readings showed typical mammalian brain patterns: elevated stress from space travel, fatigue from long duty shifts, homesickness for their birth world. Nothing unusual. Then the memories began to flow. The first human mind they touched belonged to a young officer standing watch on the bridge. Lieutenant Torres, according to the ship's records. The probe slipped into his consciousness like water, expecting to find the usual mix of duty and boredom. Instead, it found nightmares. Torres was remembering the Battle of Kepler Station. The images flooded through the neural link with stunning clarity. HFY watched through the human's eyes as enemy ships swarmed around the space station like angry insects. Explosions bloomed in the darkness, tearing through hull plating and venting atmosphere into space. But the humans didn't retreat. They held their positions as the station shook apart around them. HFY saw Torres crawling through damaged corridors, dragging wounded comrades to safety while plasma fire scorched the walls. The young officer had been just 18 years old, barely an adult by human standards, yet he moved through the chaos with determination that puzzled the alien captain. The memory shifted. Torres was now in the station's command center, where the human commander was giving orders. Half her face was covered in blood from a head wound, but she never stopped coordinating the defense. Around her, other humans worked at damaged consoles, some with obvious injuries, all refusing to abandon their posts. "Sir," Kethvar whispered, his voice tight with confusion. "These readings are unusual. The stress hormones should have triggered flight responses, but instead they seem to be producing combat effectiveness." HFY said nothing, watching the memory play out. The space station was dying, its hull breached in dozens of places. Any rational species would have evacuated. Instead, the humans fought harder. The probe moved to another mind, Chief Petty Officer Williams, an older human with graying hair. His memories took them deeper into the battle. Williams had been in charge of damage control, leading repair teams into sections of the station that were barely pressurized. HFY watched the man seal hull breaches while wearing a damaged environment suit, knowing that one small tear would mean death in the vacuum of space. What struck the alien captain was not just the human's courage, but his reasoning. Williams wasn't acting from blind instinct or battle fury. He was making calculated decisions, weighing risks and accepting danger because it served a larger purpose. The man knew he might die and chose to continue anyway. The neural probe found more memories, each one more disturbing than the last. Humans throwing themselves onto explosive charges to protect their teammates, pilots flying damaged fighters into enemy formations, using their own ships as weapons, soldiers holding defensive positions until ammunition ran out. then switching to hand-to-hand combat rather than surrender. "Captain," Kethvar's voice was shaking now, "I'm detecting something else. These humans, they carry emotional trauma from these events. They appear to be suffering from surviving combat." This made no sense to Vexhai. In Zephyrian culture, survival was the ultimate goal. A warrior who lived through battle was celebrated, not traumatized. But the human mind showed clear patterns of guilt and grief, even for victories they had achieved. The probe touched the consciousness of Commander Elena Vasquez, the ship's executive officer. Her memories revealed the end of the Kepler station battle. The human defenders had held out for 6 months, long enough for reinforcements to arrive. When the enemy finally retreated, Vasquez had walked through the station's corridors counting the dead. 3,000 humans had died defending Kepler station. The survivors mourned each one by name. Vexhai felt a chill run through his nervous system. The Zephyrians had fought wars of conquest for millennia, but they were clean affairs, fought at range with advanced technology, decided by superior firepower. This was something else entirely. The humans seemed to embrace suffering as part of their military doctrine. The probe moved deeper, accessing the ship's personnel files. The UES Retribution wasn't even a frontline vessel. It was returning from a routine patrol, its crew consisting mainly of veterans who had been rotated away from active combat zones. These were humans considered war-weary by their military command. If these were the tired ones, what were the active fighters like? More memories flooded through the link. Humans fighting in radiation zones that would kill most species instantly. Underwater combat in crushing depths. Battle in the frozen vacuum of space with damaged life support systems. Each memory showed the same pattern. Humans accepting impossible conditions and finding ways to not just survive but win. The most disturbing discovery was in the ship's cultural database. The probe found human literature, music, and art that glorified death in battle. They had songs about dying for their comrades, poems about sacrifice for abstract concepts like honor and duty. Their entertainment media was filled with stories of heroes who chose death over defeat. "Sir," Kethvar reported, his tentacles trembling over the controls, "I'm reading increased activity in the human minds. They may be becoming aware of our presence." Vexhai looked at the tactical display. The human ship's energy readings were spiking. Internal communications traffic was increasing. Even unconsciously, they were responding to the psychic intrusion as a threat. And their response wasn't panic. It was preparation. "Continue monitoring," Vexhai ordered, though his own certainty was beginning to crack. "I need to understand what we're dealing with." The probe delved deeper into the human ship, and the memories it found would haunt the Zephyrian captain for the rest of his life. The neural probe sank deeper into the human ship, and with each new mind it touched, the Zephyrians discovered more disturbing truths. Captain Vexhai watched the data stream with growing unease as his species' understanding of warfare was turned upside down. Commander Elena Vasquez was dreaming, and through the psychic link, the aliens experienced her memories as if they were living them. The Battle of Wolf 359 unfolded in terrifying detail through her unconscious mind. Vasquez had been a fighter pilot then, leading a squadron of interceptors against an overwhelming enemy force. The probe team watched through her eyes as hundreds of enemy ships emerged from hyperspace, their weapons already firing. The human fleet was outnumbered 5-1. Most species would have retreated immediately. The humans charged forward. Vexhai observed Vasquez's fighter weaving through a deadly maze of energy beams and explosive charges. Her craft took hit after hit, hull plating melting away, systems failing one by one. Warning lights flashed red across her cockpit displays. Any reasonable being would have ejected and hoped for rescue. Instead, Vasquez stayed at her controls, flying a crippled fighter through an asteroid field while blood ran down her face from shrapnel wounds. The probe recorded her thoughts during those moments. She wasn't thinking about survival or glory. She was calculating firing solutions and protecting the civilian transports fleeing behind her. "Fascinating," whispered Kethvar, though his voice carried notes of horror rather than scientific interest. Her pain receptors are fully active, but she's ignoring the signals. "How is this possible?" The memory continued. Vasquez's fighter was dying around her. Life support failing, artificial gravity offline. She was pressed back into her seat by acceleration forces that should have knocked her unconscious. Through it all, she kept fighting, using her damaged ship to draw enemy fire away from the evacuation convoy. When her weapons finally ran dry, she didn't retreat. She aimed her fighter at the largest enemy ship and accelerated to ramming speed. The Zephyrians watched in stunned silence as the human woman prepared to die, not from desperation or madness, but from cold calculation. Her sacrifice would eliminate a capital ship and save thousands of civilians. In her mind, it was a fair trade. At the last moment, her wingman had destroyed the enemy vessel with a lucky shot, and Vasquez had managed to eject from her disintegrating fighter. But the probe team could see that she still carried guilt about surviving when others had not. The neural link shifted to another dreaming mind, Sergeant Marcus Chen, a ground forces veteran. His memories took the aliens to the surface of Tau Ceti 4, where human troops had fought a brutal campaign against entrenched enemies. Chen had been part of an assault unit tasked with taking a strategic bridge across a toxic river. The position was defended by automated weapons and energy barriers that could cut through most armor like paper. A frontal assault should have been suicide. The humans attacked anyway. Vexai watched through Chen's memories as the sergeant led his squad across open ground under murderous fire. Soldiers fell on both sides of him, their bodies torn apart by high-energy weapons. The smart tactical choice would have been to retreat and call for orbital bombardment. Instead, Chen kept moving forward. The probe recorded the sergeant's thoughts during the assault. He wasn't driven by bloodlust or battle rage. His mind was clear and focused, processing tactical information and coordinating with his surviving squad members through hand signals when their communications were jammed. He saw his friends die and felt each loss like a physical blow, but he never stopped advancing. When Chen's squad finally reached the bridge, only 3 humans were left alive out of 12. They held that position for 72 hours against constant counterattacks, refusing relief and evacuation orders because they knew the bridge was critical to the larger battle plan. "Sir," Kethvar reported, his tentacles shaking over the controls, "these humans appear to have weaponized their own social bonds. They're not fighting for personal survival. They're fighting for abstract concepts and group loyalty." The probe moved to another mind, finding Lieutenant Sarah Kim in the ship's medical bay. Her memories revealed a different aspect of human warfare, their approach to treating the wounded. The Zephyrians discovered that human medics would enter active combat zones to retrieve injured soldiers, often under heavy fire. Kim had been a combat medic during the siege of Proxima Station. The probe experienced her memories of crawling through bombed-out corridors, dragging wounded humans to safety while enemy forces hunted for survivors. She had operated on patients while the station shook from explosions, performing surgery without anesthesia, because medical supplies had run out. What disturbed the aliens most was Kim's emotional response to these memories. She felt pride in her work, satisfaction at saving lives under impossible conditions. To the Zephyrians, her actions seemed insanely dangerous, risking her life for humans who were already injured and might not survive anyway. But the probe readings showed that this behavior wasn't abnormal among humans. Their entire military medical system was built around the principle that no wounded soldier should be abandoned. They had developed specialized equipment, training, and doctrine specifically for retrieving casualties from active battlefields. The neural link found more memories, each one adding to the growing picture of human military culture. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez recalled urban warfare on the mining colony of New Brasilia, where human soldiers had fought room by room through a city to protect civilian evacuation sites. The fighting had lasted for weeks, with humans accepting massive casualties rather than abandon the non-combatants. Private Johnson's memories showed the aftermath of the Battle of Europa Base, where surviving humans had spent days digging through collapsed bunkers to find wounded comrades, working without rest even after the enemy had retreated. They had recovered every body, living and dead, because in human culture, leaving fallen soldiers behind was unthinkable. Master Chief Thompson dreamed of void warfare, combat in the vacuum of space between ships. The probe watched through his memories as human boarding parties fought in zero gravity, using magnetic boots and handheld weapons to take enemy vessels room by room. Thompson had killed enemies with his bare hands in corridors filled with floating debris and blood, never considering retreat even when outnumbered. Each memory revealed the same pattern. Humans didn't just fight to win, They fought according to complex codes of honor and duty that often put them at tactical disadvantages. They would accept higher casualties to protect civilians, risk their own lives to recover wounded comrades, and choose death over actions they considered dishonorable. "Captain," Kethvar's voice was barely a whisper, "I'm detecting something else in these memories. The humans have contingency plans for fighting wars from their own colonies. They've prepared detailed protocols for guerrilla warfare, scorched earth tactics, even destroying their own worlds rather than surrender them." Vexhai felt ice forming in his breathing slits. The implications were staggering. These weren't just warriors. They were a species that had evolved to wage total war, accepting any cost rather than submit to defeat. The probe continued its work, uncovering layer after layer of human military experience. The more the Zephyrians learned, the more they realized they had made a terrible mistake. They had thought they were studying a primitive species, but instead they had found something far more dangerous. They had found apex predators who had turned warfare into an art form. The neural probe pushed deeper into the human ship's data systems, and what the Zephyrians discovered there made their previous findings seem tame. Captain Vexhai watched the information flow across his displays, each new piece of data adding to a picture of humanity that defied everything his species believed about intelligent life. The ship's database contained detailed records of human military history spanning thousands of years. The probe accessed archived battle reports, tactical manuals, and training documents that revealed the true scope of humanity's relationship with warfare. The first shock came from environmental data. Humans had fought battles in conditions that would instantly kill most known species. The probe found records of combat operations in radiation zones so intense that the fighters' own equipment was breaking down around them. Human soldiers had continued fighting even as their protective gear failed, accepting doses of radiation that should have been immediately lethal. On the ice world of Hoth 7, human Marines had conducted a 3-month campaign in temperatures that reached -80 degrees. Their breath froze in their lungs, their weapons jammed from cold, and their vehicles broke down regularly. They had won anyway, adapting their tactics and equipment to conditions that other species would consider uninhabitable. The Battle of Titans. Depths showed humans fighting underwater at crushing pressures that would collapse the bodies of most air-breathing species. They had developed specialized armor and weapons for this environment, turning the ocean floor into a battlefield and winning a decisive victory against enemies who thought the location was impossible to attack. "Sir," Kethvar reported, his voice tight with disbelief, "I'm finding tactical doctrines for combat in vacuum. They have specialized units trained to fight in open space with no environmental protection except basic suits." Vexhai studied the data with growing alarm. Human Void Marines were trained to operate in the vacuum between ships, using magnetic grapples and chemical thrusters to maneuver, while engaging enemies with handheld weapons. They fought in an environment where a single small tear in their suit meant death, treating it as just another battlefield. The probe accessed training records from human military academies. The Zephyrians discovered something that shook their understanding of military psychology. Humans had developed ways to enhance their natural aggression and channel it into tactical effectiveness. The files described berserker conditioning, training, programs that taught human soldiers to enter controlled states of battle fury. In this condition, they became nearly unstoppable in close combat while retaining enough tactical awareness to coordinate with their units. The probe found combat footage of these berserker units in action, humans moving through enemy positions like forces of nature, shrugging off wounds that should have incapacitated them. But what truly disturbed the Zephyrians was that this wasn't mindless rage. The humans had weaponized their own emotional responses, turning fury into a precision tool. Berserkers could switch between savage combat effectiveness and calm tactical analysis in seconds, making them unpredictable and extremely dangerous opponents. The database revealed human military organization that defied conventional logic. Other species built their forces around self-preservation, keeping their best troops alive and minimizing casualties. Humans had developed the concept of acceptable losses, statistical models that calculated how many soldiers they were willing to sacrifice to achieve strategic objectives. The probe found planning documents for Operation Hellstorm, a human assault on a heavily fortified enemy position. The battle plan openly acknowledged that 60% of the attacking force would likely be killed or wounded. The human commanders had proceeded with the operation anyway because the strategic gains outweighed the human cost. Most disturbing was that this wasn't callousness or stupidity. The documents showed careful consideration of alternatives, attempts to minimize casualties where possible, and genuine grief over the projected losses. But in the end, human military leaders were willing to spend lives like currency to achieve their goals. HFY discovered records of something called dead man switches, automated systems designed to trigger if human commanders were killed or captured. These devices could detonate entire fleets, destroy orbital installations, or even render planets uninhabitable rather than let them fall into enemy hands. The Battle of Kepler Station had ended with such a device. When defeat became inevitable, the human commander had activated a system that would have destroyed the entire star system, taking the enemy fleet with it. Only the arrival of reinforcements at the last moment had prevented mutual annihilation. "They've prepared protocols for destroying their own colonies," HFY whispered, his tentacles trembling over the controls. "Rather than allow capture, they'll render entire worlds uninhabitable. This goes beyond tactics. It's a complete willingness to choose extinction over defeat." The neural probe accessed human psychological profiles and discovered another terrifying truth. The species had evolved complex social structures that turned individual bonds into military advantages. Human soldiers fought harder when protecting their comrades, accepted greater risks when their friends were in danger, and could be motivated to incredible acts of courage through appeals to group loyalty. But this social bonding had a dark side. Humans who lost their military units often suffered severe psychological damage. The probe found medical records of soldiers who had survived battles where their comrades died, many requiring extensive treatment for what humans called survivor's guilt. The Zephyrians had never encountered anything like this. In their culture, survival was always the primary goal. A warrior who lived through battle while others died was fortunate, not traumatized. But humans seemed to suffer actual physical and mental damage from surviving when their friends did not. The database revealed human concepts of military honor that further confused the aliens. Humans would accept tactical disadvantages rather than violate their codes of conduct. They had rules about treating prisoners, protecting civilians, and conducting warfare that often put them at strategic disadvantages. Yet these same ethical constraints seemed to make them more dangerous, not less. Human forces fought with greater determination when they believed their cause was just, showed incredible resilience when defending innocence, and inspired fierce loyalty from allied species who trusted their protection. The probe accessed historical files dating back to humanity's pre-space period. The Zephyrians discovered that humans had been practicing total warfare for millennia. Their species had fought global conflicts involving hundreds of millions of combatants, developed weapons capable of destroying their entire civilization, and somehow managed to not only survive but thrive. The file on World War II showed humans fighting a global conflict that lasted 6 years and killed over 70 million people. Instead of devastation leading to collapse, the war had accelerated human technological development and strengthened their industrial capacity. They had emerged from the conflict more advanced and more unified than before. "Captain," HFY reported, his voice barely audible, "I'm detecting movement in the human ship. Their consciousness levels are rising. They're becoming aware of our intrusion." HFY looked at the tactical display. Energy readings from the human vessel were increasing steadily. Internal communications were spiking as crew members moved to battle stations. The probe had been active for less than an hour, but somehow the humans were detecting it, and their response wasn't panic or confusion. Alert signals were spreading through the ship in organized patterns. The humans were treating the unknown intrusion as a tactical problem to be solved, implementing defensive procedures with practiced efficiency. The probe captured one final piece of information before the humans' mental defenses began to strengthen. Deep in the ship's classified files was a personnel roster showing crew rotation schedules. The Retribution was not a frontline combat vessel. It was a patrol ship, staffed with veterans who had been rotated away from active war zones for rest and recovery. These were the humans their military considered worn out and in need of rehabilitation. If this was what their tired warriors looked like, what were their fresh combat troops capable of? The answer to that question would haunt Captain HFY for the rest of his life. The probe team's final scan of the human ship's archives revealed the ultimate horror, not just what humanity was capable of in war, but how their entire civilization had been shaped by conflict. Captain Vexhai watched the data stream with growing dread as the true nature of human society became clear. The historical databases painted a picture of a species forged in fire. Humans had never known peace. Their recorded history showed thousands of years of continuous warfare, with conflicts ranging from tribal raids to global wars that reshaped continents. What terrified the Zephyrians was that this constant fighting hadn't weakened humanity. It had made them stronger. The probe accessed educational records from human schools and discovered that children were taught military history as a core subject. Human young learned about famous battles, studied great military leaders, and were expected to understand tactical principles before they reached adulthood. War wasn't something that happened to humans. It was part of their cultural identity. Kethvar's tentacles shook as he processed the cultural data. Sir, their entertainment media is filled with warfare glorification. They create fictional stories about combat for pleasure, and their most popular forms of art celebrate military themes. The probe found examples everywhere. Human literature included epic poems about warriors who died gloriously in battle, novels about soldiers overcoming impossible odds, and philosophical works that treated warfare as a noble profession. Their music contained marching songs, battle hymns, and memorial pieces for fallen warriors that were considered high art. Most disturbing were their children's games. Human young played with toy weapons, acted out historical battles, and competed in war-themed simulations from early ages. The species was literally training its offspring for conflict from the moment they could walk. The probe accessed religious and philosophical texts that revealed another terrifying truth. Multiple human belief systems included concepts like holy war, righteous combat, and sacred duty to fight evil. They had turned warfare into a spiritual calling, convincing themselves that violence could be morally justified and even required. The database contained records of human warriors who were considered saints and heroes specifically for their combat achievements. These weren't generals or leaders, but individual fighters who had performed acts of extraordinary violence in service of their beliefs. Human society celebrated killers as moral exemplars. Vexhai studied psychological profiles that showed how humans bonded with their weapons and equipment. They gave names to their ships, aircraft, and even individual firearms, treating instruments of war like family members. Human soldiers often displayed emotional attachment to tools, designed for killing that went far beyond simple familiarity. The probe found maintenance records showing humans decorating their weapons with personal symbols, keeping detailed logs of their combat performance, and even passing favored weapons down through generations like family heirlooms. They had formed emotional connections with the means of warfare itself. The military organization data revealed structures that defied logic. Humans maintained separate branches of armed forces that specialized in different types of combat. Land, sea, air, and space operations each had dedicated personnel who trained their entire lives for specific warfare environments. The level of specialization suggested a species that had turned fighting into a science. But more than that, humans had developed overlapping redundancies in their military systems. If one branch was destroyed, others could adapt to fill the gaps. Their armed forces were designed to continue functioning even after suffering catastrophic losses, with surviving units capable of taking on multiple roles. The probe accessed procurement records that showed the scale of human military production. Entire star systems were dedicated to manufacturing weapons, ships, and equipment for their armed forces. The industrial capacity devoted to warfare exceeded what most species used for their entire civilizations. What made this more terrifying was the efficiency of human war production. They had developed standardized designs that could be manufactured quickly, modular systems that could be repaired in field conditions, and supply chains that could function even under enemy attack. Their entire industrial infrastructure was designed to support continuous warfare. The cultural archives revealed human concepts of heroism that centered around military sacrifice. Their greatest heroes weren't inventors, artists, or philosophers. They were warriors who had died protecting others. Human society reserved its highest honors for those who gave their lives in combat. The probe found memorials on every human world dedicated to fallen soldiers. These weren't just historical markers. They were active cultural sites where living humans came to pay respects and renew their commitment to military service. The dead warriors continued to influence living society through their example. Records showed that human families took pride in military service spanning multiple generations. Parents celebrated when their children joined the armed forces, and military service was considered a pathway to social advancement and personal honor. The species had made warfare attractive to its young people. The psychological profiles revealed that humans who had never seen combat often felt incomplete or inadequate compared to veterans. Their society valued military experience so highly that non-combatants sometimes suffered from what they called civilian guilt, shame at not having risked their lives for their community. "Captain," Kethover whispered, his voice breaking with horror, "I've found their strategic planning documents. They've prepared detailed scenarios for fighting wars that would last decades or even centuries. They've calculated resource requirements for conflicts that could span multiple generations." The files showed human war planning that went far beyond immediate tactical concerns. They had developed strategies for multi-generational conflicts, plans for rebuilding military forces after catastrophic defeats, and protocols for continuing resistance even if their government and military command structure were completely destroyed. The probe accessed contingency plans that revealed the ultimate depth of human commitment to warfare. If defeated conventionally, they were prepared to wage guerrilla wars from their own colonies. If their fleets were destroyed, they had protocols for building new ones in secret. If their worlds were occupied, they had prepared resistance networks that could fight for decades. Most chilling was Document Omega-7, a classified protocol for species survival warfare. If humanity faced extinction, they were prepared to sacrifice everything, their colonies, their infrastructure, even most of their population, to ensure that enough humans survived somewhere to eventually rebuild and seek vengeance. The probe found records of war games where human military leaders practiced scenarios involving the total destruction of their civilization. They had calculated minimum survival populations, identified which technologies and knowledge bases were essential to preserve, and developed protocols for rebuilding from almost nothing. These weren't theoretical exercises. The planning was detailed, practical, and had been updated regularly for decades. Humanity wasn't just prepared for war, they were prepared for wars that could destroy civilizations. The final horror came from intercepted communications between human colonies. The probe discovered that human expansion wasn't random or peaceful. They were systematically mapping every star system they encountered, cataloging the military capabilities of other species, and identifying strategic resources that could support future warfare. Humanity was spreading across the galaxy like a military reconnaissance mission, gathering intelligence on potential enemies and preparing for conflicts that might not occur for generations. They weren't exploring space, they were scouting it. "Sir," Kethvar's voice was barely audible, "the human ship is implementing active countermeasures. They're somehow detecting our probe and taking defensive action." Vexhai looked at the tactical display with new understanding. The humans weren't just responding to the intrusion. They were treating it as an act of war. Their defensive measures were precise, coordinated, and designed not just to repel the probe, but to gather intelligence on whoever was responsible. Even while under psychic attack, they were learning about their enemies. The neural probe session ended abruptly when the human crew began to sense the alien intrusion. Captain Vexhai watched in horror as warning lights flashed across his tactical display. The humans weren't just detecting their presence, they were actively fighting back. "Sir, they're implementing some kind of psychic countermeasure," Kethvar reported, his tentacles dancing frantically over the controls. "Their minds are becoming organized, coordinated. It's like they're forming a collective defense network." Through the failing neural link, the Zephyrians caught glimpses of the human response. The crew of the Retribution wasn't panicking or fleeing from the unknown threat. Instead, they were calmly implementing anti-boarding protocols, securing sensitive areas, and preparing for combat with the same professional efficiency they would use against any enemy. Commander Vasquez had taken the bridge, her voice steady over the ship's communication system as she ordered battle stations. The crew responded instantly, moving through corridors with practiced precision. Even the off-duty personnel were awakening and reporting to assigned positions without confusion or delay. What terrified Vexhai most was that the humans seemed to treat the psychic intrusion as just another tactical problem to solve. They didn't understand what was happening to them, but they had immediately classified it as a hostile action and were responding accordingly. "They're not afraid," Kethvar whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "They detected an unknown threat capable of penetrating their ship's defenses and reading their minds, and they're not afraid. They're just preparing to fight back." The probe captured one final burst of information before the human mental defenses forced it out completely. Deep in the ship's classified files was a roster showing crew assignments and rotation schedules. The data revealed something that made Vexhai's breathing slits freeze with terror. The UES Retribution was not a frontline combat vessel. It was a patrol ship, assigned to routine duties in secure space. Its crew consisted entirely of veterans who had been rotated away from active war zones for psychological recovery and rest. These were humans their military considered combat-fatigued and in need of rehabilitation. If these war-weary soldiers could respond to an unknown threat with such calm professionalism, what were the fresh combat troops capable of? The answer came from the ship's personnel files. The probe's final scan revealed that the truly dangerous humans, the Special Forces operators, the elite Marines, the experimental warfare units, were stationed elsewhere, on ships specifically designed for maximum lethality. The Retribution was crewed by what Human Command considered their gentler, more stable personnel. "Sir, we need to withdraw immediately," Kethvar urged, his entire body trembling. "The humans are attempting to trace our signal back to its source. If they locate us," Vexhai was already giving orders. The Mindseeker began emergency withdrawal procedures, charging its hyperspace engines while slowly backing away from the human ship. But even as they prepared to flee, the captain couldn't stop watching the tactical display. The Retribution was coming alive with activity. Energy signatures spiked as weapon systems powered up. Launch bays opened to release fighter craft. The ship's defensive screens activated, creating a shimmering barrier of energy around the hull. And through it all, the human crew moved with the calm efficiency of apex predators who had detected a potential threat. They weren't angry or frightened. They were simply preparing to eliminate whatever had dared to intrude upon their territory. "Jump now," Vexhai ordered. The Mindseeker vanished into hyperspace just as the first human fighters began spreading out in a search pattern. The Zephyrian ship fled at maximum velocity, its crew silent with shock at what they had discovered. During the long journey home, Vexhai compiled his report with growing dread. The Zephyrian collective had sent him to analyze a primitive species, expecting to find the usual patterns of fear, aggression, and simple survival instincts that characterized most intelligent life. Instead, they had encountered something unprecedented, a species that had evolved every aspect of their civilization around the concept of warfare. Human technology, culture, psychology, and social structures all served a single purpose: making them more effective at organized violence. The captain's report painted a picture of a species unlike anything in the galactic databases. Humans didn't just fight when threatened. They actively sought out conflicts, competed for dangerous assignments, and found meaning and honor in warfare itself. They had weaponized their own capacity for love and loyalty, turning emotional bonds into tactical advantages. Most terrifying was their approach to defeat. Other species would surrender when faced with overwhelming odds, negotiate when outmatched, or flee when threatened with extinction. Humans had prepared detailed protocols for fighting wars that could last centuries, rebuilding from catastrophic defeat and, if necessary, ensuring that enough of their kind survived somewhere to eventually seek revenge. They were a species that had turned genocide into a strategic consideration rather than an existential threat. As the Mindseeker approached Zephyrian space, Vexhai made a decision that would reshape galactic politics. His official report to the collective's high command was classified at the highest levels, with access restricted to only the most senior officials. The report's conclusions were simple and terrifying. Humanity should be immediately reclassified from minor species to apex predator threat, with a strict non-contact protocol. Any further interaction with humans should be avoided at all costs. But it was the report's final paragraph that sealed humanity's fate in the minds of the collective's leaders. "We have encountered a species that has weaponized love itself. They kill not from hatred or hunger, but from devotion to abstract concepts and loyalty to their companions. They have turned suffering into strength, made sacrifice sacred, and built their entire civilization around the principle that some things are worth dying for. There may be no defense against such creatures, because they have evolved beyond the basic survival instincts that govern all other known life. If humanity ever discovers the location of our worlds, we must assume they will fight until every human is dead, and take as many of us with them as possible. The High Command's response was swift and unanimous. All Zephyrian expansion efforts were quietly redirected away from human space. Trade routes were altered to avoid human territories. Even long-range surveys were forbidden in sectors where humans might be encountered. The Zephyrian Collective, one of the oldest and most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, began to hide from a species they had discovered by accident. Years later, as human colonies continued their relentless expansion across the stars, other alien species would encounter the same terrifying truth. Each contact would end the same way, with ancient civilizations quietly withdrawing from human space, leaving the galaxy's apex predators to spread unchallenged through the darkness between stars. Humanity continued its growth, unaware that their mere existence had terrified some of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations into voluntary exile. The humans explored, colonized, and built their interstellar empire with the same calm professionalism they brought to everything else. They had no idea they were alone, not because they were the only intelligent species in their region of space, but because all the others had decided that sharing a galaxy with humanity was too dangerous to risk. The probe of a single human patrol ship had revealed a truth that would reshape galactic civilization. Some species were simply too dangerous to coexist with, no matter how advanced your technology or how ancient your culture. And humanity was one of them.